Hello, all you creative seekers. My name is Hunter Lee Hughes. This is a scarf that was once owned by my grandmother, Kathleen. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her today, pay tribute to some of the poetry that she wrote. And I'm doing that because I told my mother I would for Christmas, but also because I want you guys to think about some of the people in your life who've made a positive difference for you. Now, about my grandmother, Kathleen, she kind of saw her life as a small-scale adventure. She and my grandfather, Walter, owned a small apple orchard in Strongsville, Ohio. She was a Depression-era baby, so for those of you Gen Z people, the Depression-era babies were those who grew up in the Great Depression, and like many of them, she had this trait of wanting to kind of keep everything. Because, of course, the Great Depression was an incredibly hard time in our country, and you had to make things stretch and reuse things. So my grandmother would often imagine a future possible use case for, I don't know, anything of an old utensil or bandana, and she'd save it and it'd go into her crawl space. So there was a lot of stuff in there. She also knew how to sew and was very good at sewing. She was also kind and noticed things. I remember that when I was 4 or 5 years old, I spent my first Christmas in Ohio. My grandmother noticed that I had this passion for my stuffed animal collection, and she hand sewed a miniature stocking for each of the magical imaginary friends in my stuffed animal collection. She put their name on the stocking and strung together the stockings with this red ribbon and hung it in her living room. And on Christmas morning, I woke up and Santa had placed a nickel or a candy cane or a piece of licorice or something in each of these stockings for all my stuffed animals. And that made it just such a wonderful, magical Christmas. When I moved to Los Angeles at age 21 to pursue my own dreams, I remember that I started, calling her on the phone, and I would share some of the small-scale adventures I would have here in LA. And I shared with her how I was delighted to be able to rollerblade, at the edge of the ocean on this path and at the Santa Monica beach. And she was really taken by that. She loved hearing about that. And from then on, in our kind of weekly chats, she would often ask me, have you been skating lately? And one time she added, I like to think of you skating. She died in 2006. After she was gone, my mother, Carrie, who was a very dutiful daughter, she performed this very thankless task of going through and decluttering everything that my grandmother had accumulated over her 9 decades of life. And in fact, the decluttering itself took decades. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of witnessing something like that, but it's really impossible for anyone to know what this or that object meant to my grandmother or grandfather. But, most of it just seemed like crap to us. But there were some big exceptions to that rule. And just this year, my mother found 3 copies of a collection of poems that my grandmother wrote and intended to send to a publisher for consideration. So my mom sent me one of the 3 copies of this writing that my grandmother did, 20 pages of writing, whatever it was. And she said, please, could you do something with the poems to pay tribute to your grandmother? So here we go. For this first poem, what I want you to know is that my grandmother had a BA in chemistry that she earned in 1941, which is rare for a woman in that era to have a college degree. But even so, my grandmother seems to have her heart invested in a different subject. This first poem is called Resume by Kathleen Hendon. My work is not classic, pure doggerel, in fact. My age is ripe, but you say it with tact. 62 is the number, yet it's older I act. All along it's been hard, 'cause it's talent I lack. I've never been published, nary a line, nor encouraged to submit at some other time, nor have I been praised because a line was fine. Being widely read is not a pleasure that's mine. My schooling is ancient, unrelated to this. My wants are provided, but this brings me bliss. To pursue it in style, it's an artist I miss, since to tell what I'm thinking is quite a long list. When I first read this poem, and many of the times I've read it since then, I keep thinking about this long list of thoughts that my grandmother had, and that being a poet was apparently one of them, and also this feeling that she didn't have the talent to fulfill that longing. She never talked to me about that, and I certainly never asked her anything about that. So that makes it a bit ironic that the next poem is called To a Non-Communicator. If silence were golden, as often I'm told, you'd rival Midas in his chamber of gold. If silence made riches, as one might suspect, you'd have more than Croesus in any respect. If silence brought joy, you'd have a full share, buckets o'erflowing, some you might spare. If silence paid cash, you'd owe not a cent. You could buy and buy without having it spent. If silence gave pleasure, happy you'd be, as you'd long for nothing your eye could see. If silence saved time, the clock would not stop. You'd last forever, not missing a talk. If silence taught lessons, you'd know all. Nothing mentioned you'd fail to recall. If silence had wings, soaring you'd go, upward and onward, forever you'd flow. If silence knew danger, scarcely you'd sit, waiting for tragedy upon you to hit. If silence bore blessings to scatter far, you'd have a plenty to reach any star. If silence bred loneliness, that you would know. You felt it always, and like it so. This next one, you'll forgive me, is a sentimental choice because the title of the poem is To a Grandbaby. Something new, something grand, something you can't reprimand. Be it large or be it small, you'll be showing one and all just how many dreams come true when the baby visits you. My grandmother was the youngest of 7 children. Big families were common in the first half of the 20th century, so I can only assume this poem was dedicated to her brother Tex. The poem is called To My Brother. To a bringer of boxes, a baker of pies, a very good cook, a molder of lives, a charming fellow, a keeper of bees, a mower of lawns, a sprayer of trees, a seller of saws, a weigher of books, a friend in need, a man of good looks, a peddler of food right from the garden, a cutter of okra before it can harden. Your talents are many. Your faults are few. 'Tis a pity there aren't a few million like you. This last piece, we're going to kind of go for a meta tribute here because my grandmother wrote a poem honoring her friend and realtor, Christine Ellzey, who was tragically killed in a plane crash in 1978. A beauty, that Chris, both inside and out. And if she were truthful, there was never a doubt. Her timings were prompt, the groundwork was laid. When there was lunch, it was she who paid. Her hours were long, but her patience exceeded. Her car traveled far, but it never was speeded. Her voice was soft, her manner was gracious. Her job was hard, yet she was tenacious and endeavored to please the vaguest of buyers, to fill their needs with stairs, basements, and dryers, to fit their whims into ready-made houses, as if it were easy, like shopping for blouses where choices abound and colors are endless, where styles are varied, some bizarre and some trendless. Her outward beauty could be seen at a glance. It was helped for sure, not left to just chance. Yet more came from within, and was fathomed in part to remarks that she made not in jest nor in lark, and not in whinings like one afraid of the dark, but as one who was humble and thankful and smart. To her needs and her blessings and abilities admitted, while of others' sins and shortcomings she strictly omitted. Her beauty shone brightest when a sale fell short, as she offered her services in pleasant retort, and she wished without rancor the very best luck. Then there was true evidence of grace, kindness, and pluck. When I was younger, I thought of my grandmother as being kind of a micro patroness of the arts. She had memberships at 3 different local community theaters. When she had the chance, she would take my brother and me into Cleveland to see the ballet or a concert or take us to a museum. And I always thought that she was doing that because she was just a loving person that wanted to encourage us and round out our education. But now, after reading her poetry and knowing these unfulfilled desires that she had, I realized that she was trying to actualize this potential within her that she didn't quite know how to manage, and that was part of her interest in the arts. And looking back, I wish I had known to encourage her in her poetry and to say, keep going and try a free verse poem and whatever. But I didn't know to do that, and I didn't do that. If you have someone that's made a difference in your life, leave it in the comments. Or better yet, call them. If you can, if they're alive. And ask them, why are you so encouraging? Is there something you wanted to do with your life that hasn't gotten done yet? Can I help?